Live from the Washington, D.C. area, it's the Inside Scoop, Emerald Planet. All the ecology news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's your host, Executive Director of the Emerald Planet, Dr. Sam Lee Hancock.
Hello, I'm Dr. Sam Hancock, the President, Executive Director of Emerald Planet, coming to you from Washington, D.C. in the United States. As we look around the globe in 144 different nations, looking for the 1,000 best practices, the services, and the technologies that are making a difference as we move through the 21st century. One of the things that's happening for sure is that the population base is going from 7 to 9 billion souls by 2050. And so the challenge and the issues of how do we move forward to accommodate 2 billion new people, and at the same time we're learning is that maybe 2.5 billion of the population are going to be moving into urban areas. So the world is growing net population, but at the same time is rapidly urbanizing. We have a gentleman sitting with me that has been working on this issue for many years. A very famous international professor, teacher, businessman, and author, Dr. Joseph N. Pelton. He's the former dean of the International Space University, and he's also the co-author of what is called the Safe City, Living Free in a Dangerous World. That's kind of an ominous topic there, Joe.
Well, it's an ominous world because we're facing a whole host of problems. The overpopulation, the surge in population in megacities that essentially the thesis of our book is that urban sprawl is bad, urban density is good, but super urban density is bad again.
Yeah, let's pull up the first slide we have here, and we'll have this as a backdrop, Joe, as we move forward through this conversation, because, you know, looking at all the work that you've done over these years, you are a very young man to have done so many different things, but why do you spend so much time and effort looking at this topic as far as megacities?
Well, I worked for many years at Intelsat and was able to travel to some 70 countries around the world, including India. What we see in the slide, great contrast between luxury condominiums in Mumbai, and then 80% of the new development in Mumbai is slums.
And this is really true. I was just down in Brazil, Mexico City recently, and you've been traveling around the globe the same way. And this is really a phenomenon that we're seeing all over the globe as far as the growth of these megacities, but in slums in most cases.
Right. 80% of the new development, according to the World Bank, is slum development. And I don't know whether everyone can see this slide, but we're seeing these huge increases, like Lagos is headed toward 40 million people, and 80% of that will be slum developments. We have in the Canton region perhaps 80 million people living in this vast urban area, and we're proposing what we think are new ways of creating meta-cities to take some of the population out of these overcrowded, super saturated cities, if you will.
Well, I'm going to leave this slide up for just a moment because you and I have been traveling around the globe now almost for 40 years. So we've bear witness to everything that's going on in these cities. And the idea is something that both of us and also another author that's coming, Dr. Indu Singh, we were saying you really need to disperse the populations, allow them to have a high quality of life, but stay in place within the more rural areas. And I think that's what you're talking about as far as these meta-cities are concerned.
That's exactly one of the main theses of the book, that we need to look at this surge in population. This is the UN projections that say we may be anywhere between 10 and 12 billion people by the end of the 21st century. And even if we grow 1% per annum going forward to the year 2100, that would reach 14 billion people.
Well, you know, this is the whole thing about the population growth. Just the note that I have here in front of me, at 1900, 86% of the population were rural, and we had about right a little under 2 billion. By 2010, we had 54% urban and almost 7 billion citizens, about 6.9. So, you know, we've had a very huge, dramatic shift over the 20th century and the first part of the 21st century.
It is the most dramatic shift in the whole demographics of the Earth, and that essentially we're expecting that by 2050 we may be 70% urban, and that by later it may be 75% urban.
Well,
and
you know,
this kind of density is just too much.
It's incredible, and I was down in Rio for the Rio 20, and talking there, and we kept mentioning 54% urbanization, and you know, we're going to be 70% by 2050, and then Brazilians were looking at me and saying, look, we're already at 87% urban now. We're not waiting. Right. And of course, and most Americans don't realize that we're almost 80% urban in the United States. We have this huge expanse in the center of the country and to the west, but we are a very urban country.
Right. And the point is, as you get this super urbanization and some of the places like Lagos and what have you, it is not only slum development, but it's lack of food, lack of water. In fact, here is a demographic put together by the Sierra Club that shows the amount of water on planet Earth in relationship to the Earth, and only about 0.1% of that is available as potable drinking water. So water may be the #1 crisis that cities and urban societies face in the next 40, 50 years.
Well, this is the whole thing, Joe, they're talking about is water is the new oil as far as the need of the earth. And actually, if you look around the globe, they say on the African continent at any one time there's about 37 low to major scale conflicts going on. The Middle East is legend as far as what's happening there. And much of this really is centered on water.
Right. Well, water truly will be the space agencies, and I've worked a lot in the space industry, put together this map of the world and showed how it's getting browner and browner, and that their projection is that access to water will affect maybe 1 billion to 2 billion people. Some 25 million people have moved out of the Sahel because they can't get food and water. This is a watering hole that's drying up in Ethiopia. But people say climate change is going to bring problems. Well, it's already happened. 25 million people have already left the Sahel part of Africa.
Well, as we work with Rotary International and in turn with United Nations development projects, is that, you know, right now there's almost about 1.5 billion people that don't have access to any or good and clean potable water. But at the same time, we have the same problem of almost half the world's population, a little bit less, maybe 2.5 billion, don't have access to, you know, the sanitation and all the infrastructure it needs to clean the water we actually have.
Well, and those same people also lack access to power, to food, education, health care. It's almost always the same people who are lacking in these fundamental needs. And the safe city of the future is different than what people have conventionally thought of. It's not just physical security, but the whole idea of providing jobs and education and health care and sustainable infrastructure. That all of these things together is what these new meta-cities of the future that we're hoping will provide all of these basic needs.
Well, this goes back to the Power for Peace that we have in Emerald Planet we've been working on now for about the last 6 or 7 years, and as you know, Joe, it's really taking it down not just to the city or the community, but to the household level so they can be independent as far as water, food, and energy. And if you can do that, that solves a host of issues in the employment situation for most of these people.
Yeah. And we had a project I worked on, it started at Intelsat, but called Millennium Village, and the whole idea is to bring to rural areas education, healthcare, job training, and economic sustainability, as well as emergency warning and emergency recovery capabilities. Bring this together in integrated ways rather than piecemeal.
Well, looking at this particular slide, that's the reason I've left it here, Joe, is that you're looking at these large-scale buildings, in these very concentrated urban areas. But these buildings are really set up so that you can actually start producing your own food in those areas, to capture water, whether it's gray water or take into cisterns the rainwater, but also let each of these buildings produce their own energy.
Right. In other words, there's a caption with that said, soaring architecture is good, but in effect, it's more important to create sustainability of power sources. In Arlington County, where I chair the IT Commission, we basically are working on a 40-year energy plan, and the whole idea is to add solar cells, but also district energy management, and a whole host of things to bring not only our energy self-sufficiency up, but to bring our greenhouse gas production levels way down. And we've tried to use models from around the world, and that's what our book is all about, to provide examples from Europe, from Copenhagen, which has done so much in terms of energy sustainability, but also for Brazil and India and Egypt and the Middle East. All of these places have best practices, and I know you've worked quite a bit on this whole best practices thing, and so that's really what our book is all about, of how to attack the issue of urban security, but make that a launching point to integrate all of these things that we need to make cities sustainable for the future.
Well, that's what we're looking at right here as far as Emerald Planet TV is reaching out and linking people to those best practices around the globe. But looking at these two cities, it's the essence of everything we're talking about, Joe, is allow people to have their food, their energy, their water, and then it really makes it much easier as far as putting into place the infrastructure that is needed in these areas. We're going to leave with this slide. We only have a minute left. So, safe city, describe that. We're going to explore this in the future, but about 40 seconds.
Okay.
That's all you got.
Well, we start out with a basic security, and we say you need anti-terrorism security, but also natural disasters are really the #1 killer, and tens of millions of people have been killed due to natural disasters. So integrate that together, but in using that technology, figure out ways to use new technologies and standards to multiply the capabilities for education, for healthcare, and then dynamic urban planning, and eventually a whole visionary scale of what the cities of the future can be and how they can eliminate slums.
We're going to be out of this. Thank you for being with us as we come to you and create the Emerald Planet.
I need a job.
Necesito trabajo.
I would like to speak English better.
Me gustaría hablar inglés mejor.
I want to be a U.S. citizen.
Quisiera ser ciudadano de los Estados Unidos.
For over 35 years,
Por más de 35 años,
the Hispanic Committee of Virginia has been serving our community.
el Comité Hispano de Virginia ha estado sirviendo a nuestra comunidad.
Job training and placement,
Capacitación, ayuda para conseguir trabajo,
education for children and adults,
educación para niños y adultos,
immigration, naturalization, and medical referrals.
ayuda para los procesos de inmigración y naturalización y orientación sobre médicos
Are a small part of what we do.
son solo una pequeña parte de lo que hacemos.
For help, information, or to volunteer,
Para ayuda, información o para ofrecerse como voluntario,
contact the Hispanic Committee of Virginia,
comuníquese con el Comité Hispano de Virginia,
helping everyone participate more fully in American society.
ayudando a todos a participar plenamente en la sociedad norteamericana.
Hey, Lena, where's yours?
Would you notice if you were missing half your kidney function? According to the National Kidney Foundation, 20 million people have chronic kidney disease, and 20 million more may be at risk and not even know it. Anyone with high blood pressure, diabetes, or family history of chronic kidney disease is at risk. Early diagnosis is vitally important. To get the whole story, talk to your doctor and visit the National Kidney Foundation at kidney.org or call for a free brochure. Because when it comes to chronic kidney disease, might not know the half.
We're back to the Inside Scoop Emerald Planet. Here again, your host, Dr. Sam.
Hello and welcome to the Emerald Planet as we come to you from Washington, D.C. in the United States as we look around the globe in 144 different nations, looking for the 1,000 best practices, the technologies, the services, and the products that are making a difference as we move through the 21st century. And looking at that, as we've talked about on previous programs, is that the world is adding 2 billion new souls by 2050, possibly as many as 3 to 4 billion new souls by the end of the 21st century. So how are we going to accommodate these people? People who not want to come here to just suffer or to make do, but at the same time they want to actually have a very high quality of life, one that they should expect regardless of the country or the location where they are living. We have a gentleman sitting with me who for a number of years has really been thinking about this issue of these large-scale urban areas as we now move well beyond 50% of the world's population urban areas. It's Dr. Indu Singh, who is the Executive Director of the World Institute of Security Enhancement, called WISE. That's a very good acronym there, Indu. And also he is the co-author of the book that's just coming out called The Safe City, Living Free in a Dangerous World. And that is a powerful statement, Indu, and I know you've been working with our good friend and colleague, Dr. Joseph Pelton on this. But tell us first, what is the World Institute of Security Enhancement?
So the World Institute provides training and studies on securities all over the world. We are headquartered here in Washington, D.C., and we have an office in Singapore, and we're in the process of opening multiple offices in India, Brazil, and maybe Mexico.
Well,
but the main thing is to provide training on security, which is much more in demand today.
Yeah, well, the whole thing about security really boils down to all those basic ingredients of a good life as far as water and food, health care, education, jobs really is very important. So how does this integrate in with this, the WISE, using your acronym, in providing all these basic needs that people have as far as Maslow's hierarchy of need?
So, you know, the book is very interesting in the sense that when we say safe city, it's a broad term. And safety involves both security and beyond security, because we have to look at what do people really seek when they move to urban areas. They're looking for a couple of things. One, that they're looking for a good economic prospect for themselves and for their family. Another thing they're looking for is a better quality of life. And these two things are very attractive. So in order to deliver these two things, the cities really have to focus on certain aspects of quality of life.
Well, I know one of the things, and this is the photograph we have here, a number of cities, particularly in Europe, and I know in Asia this is happening too, is that they really want to reduce or maybe even eliminate the demand for fossil fuels and go to what they call a zero carbon footprint. How does that relate into what you're saying is as far as how to reduce the amount of frustration that people have at the local levels and enhance security at the same time?
Well, I think you're pointing out a very good example. Copenhagen, for example, has really achieved what you just pointed out. Europe is farther ahead compared to all other countries in the world because they have been working on this for nearly 25, 30 years.
Yeah, and they are making a real commitment to that as far as the zero footprint. I was in Austria, and literally every community there is working towards this whole thing.
Right, but Sam, like you, I have also traveled to 79 countries in the last 14 years. And one thing I can tell you that almost every country in the world now thinking the same way. Not necessarily they are delivering, but at least thinking the same way, that they want a better air quality, access to water, food, all those things that used to be in urban areas, primarily in the Western societies.
Well, the whole thing about this, Indu, is that, you know, the human beings, 7+ billion right now, and they're all saying, you know, the Western world had this for the last 100, 150 years, and we want it, but we want it right now.
Well, the Ottawa Spring is a good example for that, Sam. You know, what are people seeking there? You know, I think despite what we see on television in terms of pictures, they are seeking a better quality of life, along with a freedom. And those both are equally important for them. So they want to be free to choose or move somewhere else. That is what's happening.
Well, this is just like talking about the slums. At 80% of the new development, most of these mega cities,
Yes.
10 million and above, is really about trying to escape out of areas, so internally displaced peoples looking for access to water, basic human services, and they feel like the urban areas is the more prevalent and efficient way of getting it. But at the same time, you know, concentrating all these people in these cities without any basic infrastructure is just breeding, you know, discontent for the future.
It certainly is. And most of the problems really are stemming from the size of these megacities around the world. Megacities are targeted by the enemies of humanity. They are a problem in terms of providing the resources, because there is lack of it. And at the same time, more and more people are moving toward. That's the solution actually that we're proposing in this book is the meta-city, where nations and leaders and urban planners have to develop plans so that they can migrate or remigrate the population to smaller cities, what we call second-tier cities.
Well, I think this is a very smart idea. This is an idea that's been around for a long time, but it's great to see that you're really actively working on this with urban planners and elected officials and others around the globe as far as these meta-cities are concerned, because this really will take the pressure off and maybe in some cases even reverse the flow of people into these mega-cities if they can actually have an enhanced quality of life in these areas dispersed throughout the more rural countryside.
Right. But Sam, in order to achieve that, we really have to have concerted effort. We have to have the planning, and our leaders have to have the vision to implement those things that we're talking about in the book, and we're hoping that they will.
Well, looking at this, and what you're talking about is planning for the future, but at the same time being willing to provide the assets, the resources necessary in order to allow these things to actually happen. So that really, Indu, boils down to political will to make changes within society. Sometimes they're not comfortable.
That is very true, but I think you have the generation, new generation, that looks at society very differently. And their needs, their requirements, their demands are very different. The world, you know, more than 50% of the population in the world, particularly in emerging markets, they are under 25 years old.
That's amazing when you think about the actual numbers of many of these countries where you have only 2% that are like age 60 and older,
right.
And then you have 30 to 50% that are youth. That is a huge challenge.
And that's a very big challenge. And that's what the Safe City is talking about, to create the job, the economic opportunity for them, education, healthcare. Your previous guest, Dr. Pelton, was talking about that. So Safe City is a broader concept where you have to look beyond security. And that's the point we're trying to make. But the security also has a broader context. If people are not secure in economic terms, they're not going to be secure in any other term.
Well, we have a blog on the Emerald Planet website. It's called Sustainability =Stability.
That's
and
right.
you know, this is something that we have to have sustainable now, not just in the future, because the world's population is expanding as you and I are sitting here in this studio, and it's not stopping.
And one of the things that we're also pointing out in the book, Sam, that in the past, and even to a large extent today, I think the cities are focusing on growth. What we have to now focus on is how we manage the city with quality of life point of view.
Yeah. Now, looking at this chart, this is very complex. There's a lot of verbiage in this for our viewers to be able to see that, but just give us a quick summary, because we're down to about 3 minutes. And how does this, what we have here, this complex layout, relate to the new meta-city that you're working on?
Well, this actually is talking about, this slide is how you really develop meta-cities. What are the components of meta-cities, okay? And it's very simple. You know, you don't have to really look at all the elements of these charts. Think about again, going back to what I said earlier, what are people seeking out when they move out of their home and go to these urban areas? Security, quality of life. Quality of life determines jobs, education, health. And if we can provide all those things, that's what this chart is talking about. So there has to be a planning behind MetaCity. It's not going to happen automatically.
No, it's not, and that's one of the things that we found out. The longer you leave it, actually the more jumbled and the worse it actually becomes. But I think this city is really much more clear and allows the viewers here and abroad to see what it is that you're really talking about as far as the smart, but really the safe city and then these meta cities.
Well, you know, the thing is that if you look at the history of how the safe cities are evolving, it really started with the concept of a smart city. And the smart cities are built around the foundation of advanced information and communication technology. The safe city has incorporated all the elements of a smart city, but the security and sustainability have become very important for it.
Yeah. Well, I think this whole notion, we were talking about the blog and Emerald Planet website, is the sustainability equals security really is true, and I think you're really bringing this out as far as the smart city and the safe city is concerned here. And it really, it's as you were saying, Indu, it's a very logical progression as we're moving through the 21st century.
Yes.
But we have to be busy about the business of taking care of all this new humanity that's coming on the planet.
And that's quite a challenge. It's not going to happen unless we really plan and plan now. You know, this is race against time. I mean, it's important for us to also recognize that we cannot stop population growth overnight, but we can stop explosive population migration to megacities and divert them to metacities where we can manage people's lives better and give them the opportunity that they're looking for.
Well, education is one of those commonalities across all societies, regardless of socioeconomic and ethnic and religious backgrounds. As people become more educated, then the number of children being produced per family decreases. And so actually there's been a slowdown as far as the raw population expansion on the planet over the last 20 or 30 years.
Yes, there has been. But you know, the base is so large that slowdown really is not making a difference.
Yeah, that's right. It's just there's people here on the planet. We won't run out of time, but this is just absolutely fantastic into what you're doing as far as developing the safe cities. And it's something that really what you're doing now is raising the issue, bringing the dialogue, and providing the information that we need. Thank you for being with us as we create the Emerald Planet.
Art, a universal language, an expression of culture, of self. And now, thanks to Empowered Women International, a way for emerging and established immigrant and refugee artists and artisans to find hope to earn a living while enriching the lives of all of us. Empowered Women International, making a better America every day. For more information on Empowered Women International's educational programs or to make a tax-free donation, contact cfrip at AOL.com.
It would be easy to tell which kids have trouble with their eyesight. But that's not always the case. Even though 1 in 4 children may have a vision problem, eye doctors tell us the symptoms aren't always so obvious. We do know that 80% of all childhood learning is visual. And without good vision, kids can have trouble learning to read and may fall behind in school. For clues on how to spot the real-life signs of childhood vision problems and what parents can do, visit checkyearly.com. A public service message from the Vision Council of America and Reading is Fundamental.
We're back to the Inside Scoop Emerald Planet. Here again, your host, Dr. Sam.
Hello and welcome to the Emerald Planet as we come to you from Washington, D.C. in the United States, looking around the globe for the 1,000 best practices, the technologies, the services, and the products that are making a difference as we move through the 21st century. And of course, we have to add to that the people, the leadership, that are the brain trusts that are looking at how we're going to accommodate all these new people that are rapidly moving into urban areas. They're saying that we're about 54% of the world's population across the globe are living in urban areas. By 2050, maybe 70% will be living in urban areas. But at the same time, many Americans, and as I learned recently in Brazil, that almost over 80% already there before we even move close to 2050. So we have two gentlemen with us that are looking at this whole thing as far as where we're going to be going as we move through the 21st century towards 2050 and how we're going to accommodate these people. First gentleman to my immediate left is Dr. Joseph N. Pelton, and he is a very famous international lecturer and author and has, I don't know how many books he has, but 35 plus, I think, and counting. And right beside him is Dr. Indu Singh. And these gentlemen are co-authors of a new book. It's called The Safe City, Living Free in a Dangerous World. That's an ominous topic, but yet there's a lot of hope in your book, Joe. Tell us a little bit about Safe City.
Well, first on the ominous side, we address not only these issues of super urbanization and some of the things we've been talking about in terms of sustainability, but also some of the really big threats that are out there. The proliferation of nuclear weapons, the problems with storage of nuclear waste, the problems of access to radiological instruments that could create dirty bombs. These are some very real problems, as well as chemical and biological weapons that are a major concern.
Well, I know one of the things that we've talked about, Joe, is the ticking time bomb, of course, is this ever-expanding population that's growing from 7 billion to 9 billion people by the middle of the century, they're projecting, and maybe 10 to 12 billion by the end of the 21st century. And so that's another ticking bomb that's out there.
Right. But the thing is, they go together. In other words, if you have 80% of the new development being slums, and you have economically deprived people, this can give rise to terrorism and so on. So we are addressing many of those concerns that range from nuclear weapons, chemical, biological weapons, but also cyber attacks that are a real problem in terms of vulnerability to basic infrastructure and so on. So this traditional aspects of security are things that we also address in this book. So we try to get a whole gestalt, if you will, of all of these issues, of how they come together, what the problems are, and how we can devise new ways of dealing with things.
Well, looking at all this, and Dr. Singh, Indu, it's great having you with us. Joe has been with us before and does an absolutely fantastic job. I think he's an international brain trust into himself, and it's nice meeting you. But looking at what really motivated you, because this is a huge topic. You really are covering the globe, 186 plus nations. There's about 213 if you count all the territories around the planet. And how do you get your arms around this and then look at the mega cities and the new meta cities that you're really talking about and sharing with leaders around the globe?
Sam, our vision is started with one simple idea, that we have 186 countries, but there is one world. And if you look at the problems of the world today, they cut across the nations. So there has to be common approach to solving some of these problems. So we don't believe, Joe and I don't believe, that individual nations today can solve all the problems themselves, because many problems are global in nature.
Yeah, if you look at some of these, the mega cities that you have in Africa, some of them are actually going across borders of 3 countries.
That's right.
And even in other areas of the world. So, I mean, what you're talking about is that we do have an integrated world, but at the same time, we have integrated problems and challenges.
Right, and so it requires integrated solution. And that's what this book is all about. But I think there are many challenges that the 21st century is going to bestow upon the world. But in our view, the 2 greatest challenges for countries all on this planet will be cybersecurity and managing natural disasters. Because as you see changes taking place in the environment and the climate change, you already see the magnitude of these natural disasters. You know, from Katrina is almost kind of nothing compared to Sandy and others that happen in the world.
Well, it's like looking at the category 6 to 8 earthquakes. If you look from 1900 to 2000, you know, it was steady. It would be a spike every decade. Now it's gone up almost 300%.
Right.
Within, as we're moving into the second decade of the 21st century. And so, you know, all these challenges, Indu, are alive and well and actually are expanding. That's the whole thing, but nobody knows why.
And they come together, too. In other words, if you have this increase in earthquakes and you have nuclear power plants that were built to lower standards, we have the problem of the earthquake in Diablo Canyon that was built to basically withstand about a 6.0 Richter scale, and then they upgraded to the 6.75, but now we have 8 magnitude earthquakes. And the #1 rated earthquake disaster is actually about 40 miles from New York, where, again, they built it to a low standard because they didn't really have the science to know that there really is some fault lines fairly near to New York City. And so the Indian Point reactor, which is in proximity to God knows how many millions of people, is a real problem. So fitting these things together, in the case of Japan, where we had the tsunami, and then that was a disaster, and then it hit the nuclear power plant, and then that created yet another. So these things come together, and we're trying to look at these on an integrated basis.
Well, if you look at Aichi in Indonesia, where you had 250,000 plus people that were killed, but across 12 nations, across 12 nations. Right. So nothing is isolated in these whole areas. And then when you have these mega cities you're talking about 195 of them are actually directly over earthquake faults that we know about. Of course, now we're finding about others. So, Joe, when you're looking at it, again, going back to this ticking time bomb that we have going beyond just nuclear proliferation, when you have some 80% of the new people going into these mega cities over top of these earthquake faults, what's going to be the challenge as we move over the next 20, 30, 50 years?
Right. Well, the thing is, there's a long list of problems. We talked earlier about water, how that's going to, water and food are going to be huge challenges for these urban areas. And again, these things could come together. We don't usually recognize that the asteroid problem might be something to worry about. There are also things like solar flares. But in 1859, there was the Carrington event where a coronal mass ejection basically blasted Earth, and it set telegraph offices on fire, and the Aurora Borealis came all the way down to Cuba and Hawaii. If that were to hit today, we don't know what it would do in terms of wiping out cars and all of their microprocessors, airplanes in the sky with all their microprocessors. We haven't had a major event like that in 150 years, but if it were to hit today with our vulnerabilities in terms of computers and our telecommunication system, it could wipe out industrial society. And we don't want to be alarmist, but we do want to say we need to be better prepared. We need to think these things through in terms of cybersecurity, in terms of security against natural disasters.
Well, all you have to do is look at the Russians. You know, we're talking about the meteorites coming in, and people say, it's not going to happen. You know, they had one that passed within 17,000 miles of Earth, and the very next day, one of these hit in Siberia, right. And thousands of people were injured, and you had thousands of buildings that were damaged and all that. But going back to this whole thing, Indu, you got 30 to 50% of your population that's 18 and under in many of these developing nations. And so, there's a little education, food, basic infrastructure, health care for all these people. So without access to housing and employment, how are we going to address these people?
It's going to be very difficult, and like Joe said, there is a long list of challenges, Joe. But I think what nations have to do is to really get focused and prioritize. So different countries have different needs, right? Emerging markets have young population that requires employment. They are striving for better quality of life, and they have to deliver those things. Otherwise, the whole roots of democracy is going to be challenged. And for Western developed countries, they have a different set of problems. I mean, if you look at the United States in last 10 years since 2011, according to his study, we have spent $744 billion on security. And we have been very successful. There is no doubt. But are we, having spent all this money, are we really ready for the new challenges?
And are we truly any safer? I mean, we may have delayed things, but how safe are we really?
I think to a large extent we are safer, okay? And the past is the best evidence for the future. But the thing is that we really focused and spent all this money for one thing, and that was global terrorism. Today, cyber security is a much bigger challenge, and are we prepared for it despite all the money that we have spent? Answer is no. We have a long way to go.
Joe, we have about 15 seconds.
Okay.
Now, I know that for you is, anyway, what do we need to be telling policymakers right now about the future for the next 20, 30 years?
Prioritize. Understand the threats and really get the training that they need to address these issues.
Well, I tell you, this is something we're going to visit more of this as far as talking about. Now we've talked about, set the stage as far as the issues, the challenges we have, and we want to look at what are the solutions. So we're going to come back and talk about this with these two international leading experts as we look around the globe to develop Emerald Planet.
She's had more than a dozen fractures. And in the next few years, she faces 2 major surgeries to strengthen her fragile bones. She's only 10 years old. Most people don't worry about fragile bones until late in life. For those with osteogenesis imperfecta, brittle bones are a concern throughout their lifetime. Find out how you can strengthen this child's future.
Diabetes is a killer. After I was diagnosed, I didn't feel sick, so I didn't listen to my doctor. Then it struck. I had a heart attack, then a stroke, and I was only 49.
Most people with diabetes also have high blood pressure and cholesterol, which can cause severe heart damage. In fact, 2 out of 3 people with diabetes die from heart disease or stroke.
Don't let diabetes destroy your life.
Call for your free diabetes survival guide. Choose to live.
we're back to the Inside Scoop Emerald Planet. Here again, your host, Dr. Sam.
Welcome back to the Emerald Planet as we come to you from Washington, D.C. in the United States. I'm Dr. Sam Hancock, the President, Executive Director of the Emerald Planet and the Emerald Planet TV. And we're looking in 144 different nations, looking for those 1,000 best practices that are truly making a difference as we move forward. Some of these best practices are very small and used in isolated communities. Others are certainly global in nature. And so as we look at the planet that is expanding to 9 billion souls, how are we going to be able to take care of, to feed, house, educate, and take care of all the basic infrastructure that is needed at the same time to keep all these various individuals safe? We have two leading authorities and authors and researchers. First, right beside me on my left is Dr. Joseph N. Pelton. And then beside him is Dr. Indu Singh. They're co-authors of a book, The Safe City, Living Free in a Dangerous World. And Joe, you've been at this for a long time. You have, I think, some 35 or more books that you've been working on. And Indu, I read in the information about you is 5, 6, 7, or 8. I'm not sure the exact number. After 5, you kind of stop counting. But looking at this, the safe city and what you're talking about here and these mega threats. Joe, tell us a little bit about the mega threats, and then we're going to move right out of that with Indu about how we're going to solve these.
Right. Well, I think the number one mega threat, and we were just talking about this, is this mushrooming population we have on planet Earth. If we go back to 1800, there were somewhere between 800 and 900 million people on the planet. We look today, China and India both have populations of 1.3 billion people.
Yeah, each of those.
And as we have more and more automation, artificial intelligence, we need less people rather than more people. And when we look at jobs and employment, where we look at housing, looking at water, food supply, all of these issues come back to the fact that an overpopulation, and particularly in these megacities, are going to create more and more problems. So in terms of prioritizing our problems, it is probably the first and foremost is on demographics and how we can control the population. And this can involve tax policies, it can involve incentives at the village level, lots of different ways.
Well, Indu, you've created, of course, this is going to the solutions as far as all these, as you call them, the mega threats and all these mega cities that we have out there. But you have what's called the building blocks.
Yes.
And this is the whole thing around addressing the population issues, the challenges as far as infrastructure development, but tying all this into security, both physical, personal, and cybersecurity. So what are some of these building blocks as the answers to these the mega problems and challenges that we do have as we move through the 21st century?
Sam, like we said before, if you really look at the list of issues that our cities are facing across the world, it's depressing. But we also believe, both Joe and I, as authors of this Safe City book, that cities are centered of hope for the mankind. And with the increasing population living in the cities, the planners and the leaders have to think in that sense. How can we change the situation that we're in today, make it more secure, make it more prosperous, make it more opportunity driven for the younger generation who are going to live in these mega cities around the world.
And this is the one thing about this, Indu, that we really have to look at, because we do have a rapidly expanding population base in underdeveloped countries that actually don't have the basic infrastructure they need and the educational resources to take care of this 30 to 50% of the population that in some studies 25%, 25 age and lower, or 18 and lower. So looking at these demands for this young population in a place like Senegal or Ghana or other countries, how are we going to address that, Indu?
I think they are going to address because they, even though they are behind in terms of modern infrastructure, they also have the opportunity to leapfrog. They have the opportunity to use the best practices and best examples.
Just like you've done with the cell phones.
Yes. And so you can see that things look bad, but there are opportunities in this for them if they are able to harness those opportunities in a proper way.
Well, I think this is, Joe, you and I have known each other actually coming up on a number of years.
Yes, right.
And we've been talking about this for a long time as far as how we really reach out into these various populations, take the best practices that are either being created or being identified among these various nations. So how do you think we can actually start to share these best practices so they're actually being adopted by national but also community-based leaders?
Well, I think if we go back all the way to Socrates, he summed it up when he said there is only one good, which is knowledge, and only one evil, which is ignorance. And that if we can really create the educational systems using the power of internet, the power of teleeducation. I started Project Share at Intelsat, and that started out with 35 small Earth stations, and now it's more than 90,000 Earth stations in China. In India, they have EduSat, again, with well over 1 million students using that technology. Mexico has an incredible program that's reaching into all of the rural parts of Mexico and so on. So technology, and particularly educational technology and even health technology, is one of the very strong things that we push in the book and think is possible. It doesn't have to be really high tech, and we've learned a lot of things from Project Share. For instance, we found that if you import educational programs, people say they're great, they're wonderful, but they don't sustain themselves, that you have to have local grown programming and capabilities for them to sustain themselves.
Well, Indu, looking at the top risk, I know that there's remedies that you have. What would you consider the top 3 risks that we have looking at the megacities, but the ever-expanding population base? And then what remedies are you now discovering and proposing as you travel around the globe and, you were saying, almost 80 different countries?
Well, I think that in terms of 3 top risks that we point out in the book, Sam, obviously the terrorism remains a risk, a very high risk, particularly for megacities, because they are the targets. The second emerging top risk is cybersecurity, because the cyber is greatest danger to the infrastructure, modern infrastructure, whether it's your utility or it's your radio and television broadcast or whether it's your databases. And that's going to be there. And the third top risk is really, in my viewpoint, protecting the freedom. If we want to live in a free society, not only that we have to be secured, but we have to be providing economic prosperity and economic job opportunities to the younger generation, because that can be the third top risk if young people without jobs.
Well, this whole thing, if you don't have hope, and this is what really breeds the terrorism and it rapidly expands in these underdeveloped nations, is there's no hope, because you have young men particularly that without education, jobs, any opportunity of getting education and jobs and being able to build their own local communities and families. And I think, Indu, this is what you're really talking about, is how do you blend this together as far as this basic infrastructure, the food, the energy needed, and then going back to Joe's point as far as the education, is that you put it all together and then wrap the security and then, of course, the cyber security around that.
Right.
But you have to be very careful. There was a great educational program that the USAID undertook in El Salvador, and they actually took the best teachers and they developed a curriculum and they used teleeducation and they educated all these young people, and it was a great success, except there were no jobs for these people.
I was going to say, this is the essence, jobs.
It bred a revolution.
Right.
And so you have to have more than just the idea, we'll do education or we'll do health care. I talked earlier about the Millennium Village, where the whole idea was an integrated approach to power, to food and water, job training, health, education, disaster warning, and an integrated program to say, how does this all work together? And how do you make it all work so that security and prosperity and jobs all emerge from the planet? And that's the prioritizing process.
Yeah, I agree, and this is something through Emerald Planet we have with the Power for Peace. This is all integrated, but you have to solve these basic issues, just like Maslow's basic hierarchy of needs, and bring all this together. But Joe, I want you to continue on just a minute, then I'm going to come to Indu because we're getting towards the end of the program. Weapons of mass destruction.
Yes. That's
got to be quick.
That's a huge problem, but the point is it's also radiological things. All of these health clinics and hospitals have all of these stuff that's very easily available by terrorists or other people, and they can take those things and turn them into, with conventional weapons, into a dirty bomb. So it's the issue of radiological issues, of storage, of mass waste from the power plants, reprocessing them. So there are a whole host of things that need to be addressed, as well as addressing this issue of proliferation of nuclear weapons.
Yeah, and Indu, we got to jump in here quick. We only have about 50 seconds left, maybe less than that. Blueprint for creating the safe city.
Well, the blueprint is each city and each nation, as a matter of fact, they have to create their own blueprints. And what we have done in the book, we have given them 7 elements of creating the blueprints.
Can you give them to us quick?
Well, the one is, some of those we have talked about that. Building the infrastructure with intelligent, smart technology is one. Creating the educational, platforms that is available to the masses. Making sure the food and water crisis issues do not go out of proportion. So these are the things that we're talking about. Well, but again, they will vary from city to city.
Okay, we run out of time. Thank you for being with us as we create the Emerald Planet.